Absul. I'd like to welcome all of you to the 8th Annual Cambodia Town Film Festival, our virtual edition. And I'm very pleased to be here today to talk about activism and documentary film. And I'd like to introduce our two panelists. First is Kaylanee Mam. Kaylanee was born in Cambodia during the Khmer Rouge regime and fled with her family to the United States in 1981. Kaylanee's had a very interesting background and has been a lawyer, has been a filmmaker and a cinematographer, has been a producer, and I'm really eager to hear about what she's been working on. And then we have Chris Kelly, who is right now in London. Hello, Chris, how are you?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
Good, good. I'm really eager to talk about your film. And just as background, Chris has been working throughout the world, exposing a lot of the challenges and issues that countries face. So thank you both for being here, and we'll start with our first question. So I want to thank both of you for bringing the issues in these films to light. Each of the films addresses the complexities, both political and personal, of fighting for what you believe in. And these are stories of remarkable courage and integrity, albeit amidst a backdrop of corruption and injustice. So my first question, as an interviewer and as a very avid documentary film watcher, I always like to find out how a director or a producer came to hear about these stories. And so my first question is, where did you learn about or meet the individuals that you featured in the film, and what inspired you to tell their stories?
Kaylanee, do you want to go first?
You go ahead, Chris.
Okay, sure. So I first had been to Cambodia as a tourist back in 2006 and stayed at the lake, the Bangkok Lake in Phnom Penh. That was kind of like the backpacker area. And at the time I knew that I was looking, I wanted to make a film somewhere, and I read a lot about forced evictions and land grabbing, and it was kind of like the very prominent story in the news outside of Cambodia, and I picked that as a subject, and then was able to raise some funding back home in Ireland to go on a development trip to Cambodia, and that was back in 2009. And that's when I met the Venerable Lon Savat. He was at a press conference and he was there filming with his little Nokia camera phone. He was filming his Chikrang community, and I thought it would be interesting to kind of make have as a character a filmmaker in my film, because you can kind of look at the role that documentary plays in shaping history, I guess. And that's sort of where it started. And what was supposed to be a 3-month development trip rolled into 6 years. Ended up staying for 6 years, filming with the Bangkok community as well, the women there, the housewives. Very impressive group of individuals who, they took on the Cambodian government, and to some degrees they won. They were able to force the World Bank into admitting their responsibility and their role played in the forced evictions of that community. And this was a group of housewives who were hugely successful, peaceful protesters. It was very kind of very motivational story of theirs.
Yeah. Thank you. Kaylanee?
Oh, Christine, thanks for having us here. I'm really appreciating, this opportunity to share. Kaylee, who's also in the background, thank you for inviting us to be part of this. I always never know where to start because my journey is so personal. Like you said, Christine, I was born in Cambodia, but I came to the United States in 1981, as refugees with my family. We fled Cambodia, fled the war, fled the trauma, but the trauma never left us. It always stayed with us and continues to be part of my life today, even. And so my return to Cambodia was really a return to try to understand the history of that trauma and the history of our country, the history of where we come from, and also understand how that trauma is still affecting our lives today, in Cambodia, but also in the United States as well. And what I learned when I went to Cambodia, is that we are still feeling the reverberations you know, of colonialism, of the wars that had been fought in Cambodia, and also especially, you know, the recent genocide. And that genocide that we went through is still ongoing, you know, except at a slower pace. You know, people aren't being killed at gunshot, you know, with a gun pointed at them, but people are dying slowly. And, you know, Chris refers to that in his film, you know, with the people in Bangkok. You know, actually, I was able to speak with people there, and there was one man who said to me that, you know, the Khmer Rouge was really a terrible time, but this time is even worse because we are dying slowly. However, he feels that that there is no choice, you know, but to fight, you know, right now, you know, to fight for their lives, fight for their land, you know, fight for their belonging, because without all of that, you know, they might as well not live, you know. And so I truly feel that way as well, you know, that, you know, our land is our heritage, you know, it's part of who we are. And it's been destroyed many times over, and now it's being destroyed again, you know, by globalization, development, and, you know, and you ask how I met the families, you know, in A River Changes Course. I met them, you know, not seeking anyone in particular, but just going to places, you know, where I felt that that changes were happening, you know. So in the forests, up in the jungles in the northeastern part of Cambodia, where entire forests are being ravaged, you know, and then on the Tlay Sap, you know, and actually the Tlay Sap now is like, it's really contracting, and it's no longer flowing, you know, in the way that it has been before. On the Tlay Sap, you know, it's suffering from overfishing, but also the impact of the hydroelectric dams being built upstream, you know. And then in the countryside, where women are being forced, in a way, forced to find a way to support their families, you know, in the garment factories in Phnom Penh. So I went to all these places, and then somehow just met, you know, these individuals and these families, listened to their stories, and felt a true connection with them. You know, and in their stories, I feel reflected the experiences of my family. You know, when we were displaced from our land and our homeland and our motherland and our country and our roots, now people in Cambodia are being displaced from their land. You know, they're not being taken to another country, but being displaced internally, and not just displaced physically, but also spiritually, emotionally, you know, displaced as well. And so just listening to their stories, I feel that we have this connection. And I don't know, I'll stop now, but so much is happening right now in our world. You know, I mean, there's the pandemic, and then there's fires right now where I live in Santa Rosa and Sonoma County and all over California. None of these things are coincidental, you know. They're not coincidental because they are the consequences of our action, you know. And I would say those consequences are karma. You know, we are given what we are due. And in Cambodia, it will be the same too if we don't stop, you know, cutting down our trees and recognizing what is truly beautiful and important, you know, our land. Yeah, we will be in the same situation as well.
Thank you. Just following up on that, I know there were points at which you may have felt like you physically were in danger just based on the situation, but emotionally this had to take a huge toll as well. And was it, for us, both of you, was there ever a time when you just felt like, I can't do this anymore, this is just too overwhelming and it's too emotional for me? So was there ever a point at which you thought, I'm not going to be able to continue? And what drove you to go on?
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there were moments when I was physically in danger, only like filming the protests and things like that, but just that was more like bad luck, you know, because the police and the military, through lack of training or lack of care, they would respond to protesters by firing live rounds. And so, I mean, there was a guy who was shot and killed no more than 2 feet away from me when I was documenting protests. So there was a risk to life in that regard. But there was never, I was kind of left alone to do my job. I never published anything as I was working, as I was filming. I was keeping all of the material, so the authorities didn't really know exactly what I was doing, or if they did, they didn't particularly care. And so I was given fairly free rein to be able to document as much as I wanted during the land rights protests and the political protests, and during various forced evictions and other things that were involved the authorities. It's very delicate. I mean, Kaylanne, maybe you might have a similar experience, but somehow looking through the lens of the camera detaches you a little bit. It's almost like a coping mechanism in itself, by being able to separate yourself from the reality of what's going on. When it becomes really intense, I kind of focus through, I perceive the reality around me through the lens, and I'm concentrating on getting a picture that's good, and that's not shaky, and that's not out of focus, and pointing in the right direction at the right time. Khmer's not my first language, and so I'm trying to do that whilst not fully understanding everything that's going on, and so I focus on that. But more than that, you know, some of the people told me being there gives them courage and strength to continue and to fight, because when they feel like nobody cares about what's happening to them, having some, you know, foreigner standing there in his sandals with a camera filming just somehow can give them a little bit of hope. So for me, even, you know, our film was entirely kind of self-funded and crowdfunded. We had very little money, but their courage, the courage of the people that I was filming, and their willingness to be associated with me, and all of the kind of negative consequences that could have for them, you know, by being identified as a troublemaker with the authorities. They could have lost their house, or they could have lost compensation and things like that. So they took a huge risk. I always felt a very honorable debt to them, that I have to finish the film and I have to do as good a job as possible, because they, you know, sacrificed and risked so much just to let me into their lives in the first place. And so that was the motivation for me. Like, while I was making the film, it took 9 years, but every day, the first thing I thought about when I woke up was the film, and how to finish it and get it made, and, you know, try to have like an advocacy campaign with it, and release it as well as possible, and have as many people as possible see it. So really the participants were the motivation, and their kind of strength and courage.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for all your good work, you know, and it really, you know, it does take a lot of time, you know, and a little bit of courage, I think, because like Chris says, I want to echo everything you say, that I don't really think about my own danger at all. You know, actually the worst thing I have to deal with are flying leeches and mosquitoes in the jungle. You know, I don't think about my own safety. I actually, the only safety I consider is the safety of the people that we are listening to, that we are, there are stories that we are telling. I mean, they're taking so much more risk than us to tell their story, and to come out into the open and be on camera and expose, you know, their fight, you know, to the world. They're sharing so much, and they have so much courage, you know, and like you say, Chris, I think all of us feel a huge, you know, debt and gratitude, you know, to the people who are able to open up, for me, you know, actually open up their home, so that I can live with them for like months at a time. I mean, who does that? I mean, like, we live in a sea, and you know, the current film that we're working on now, I mean, I lived in a little hut, not smaller than the size of my room here, you know, all 6 of us, you know, with their children. And so I just want to say, you know, Cambodian people are so strong and so resilient. You know, we were, I don't know, somehow it's in our genes and our genetics to be this way, but not only strong and resilient, but so open, you know, with our hearts, so open to sharing, and, you know, and expressing, you know. And I've said this, you know, before about Sari, you know, in A River Changes Course. I remember filming him, you know, like interviewing him. I interviewed him many times, you know, on the boat, and he just never got tired of it, you know, and he would speak to me. But there are moments when I felt like he wasn't just talking to me. He was speaking to the world. He was sharing his story with the world, and he felt like he needed to express it. you know, that he needed to like get it out, and like somehow the world would listen to him, you know. And I think, Chris, this is something similar to what you're saying, you know, that in a way they feel really grateful also that we are there to acknowledge, you know, that their existence, their fight, you know, has meaning. You know, and I know Fran is not here with us right now, but I just want to honor Tripati, you know, and honor the film that Fran made with her team. You know, she did a really incredible job, and, you know, she was able to, you know, establish this relationship with Tripati and to tell his story. And I think also Fran feels the same too, that, you know, it was such an immense honor to tell these stories, especially of Tripati, you know, and all the struggles that he went through. It just doesn't feel like, you know, any of us are really taking much of a challenge, you know, to do what we're doing. We just feel very honored. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Speaking of I Am Chutphuti, I know that it was banned in Cambodia in 2016, but millions of people started watching it online, so they saw it anyway. So for both of you, what was the reception of your film like in Cambodia by Cambodians?
Go ahead, Chris.
Well, we tried to show our film in Cambodia officially through the film festival, and whilst the festival was very supportive of the film and everything, they decided not to show it anyway because they were concerned that it would attract the attention of the government, and because they're funded by the government, they were concerned about that. So we only showed it at the Flicks cinema in Phnom Penh, and we made it available for any of the NGOs that wanted to use it for advocacy and things like that. And so we've been able to show it online on social media, parts of it and things like that. But and it was shown in the Flicks cinema. I think it was sold out for like 6 months. I think they showed it like 3 times a day or something like that for 6 months, and it was, every screening was sold out. And so it's very popular online and in social media and things like that. But I think in some ways the government, it's never been banned or anything like that, because it's not, if you read it at face value, it's not necessarily critical of the government at face value. It's more, you have to read into the context of the story to see where the criticism lies. And ultimately, if you read it at face value, you see that the opposition party takes a deal with the CPP and the protests end, and it's all, you know, it's back to business as usual, unfortunately for the CPP and Hun Sen. So we never had any communication with the government or anything with regards to it being banned or being shown.
Thank you. Kaylanee?
Yeah, A River Changes Course was shown for the very first time in October 2012 at the Theatre Chen La Theatre, you know, in Phnom Penh, and the Documentation Center of Cambodian with Yuk Chang, director of the DC Cam, you know, and the whole team, DC Cam team, did an incredible job of setting all of that up, you know, and we brought in, you know, and elders, parents of factory workers, you know, from like the different, you know, surrounding villages. And I think 200 of them came in, and then as well as local people in the city, you know, came to the screening. I think there was like a total of 300 people. Wow. And all the subjects in the film and their families came as well. So it was a really tremendous screening. I felt so blessed, you know, to be part of that. And actually we had a Q&A afterwards, and I still remember many of the responses, you know, to the film. And one woman I remember in particular, she's from the Chan community in Phnom Penh, you know, and she stood up, you know, she had her hijab and everything. And she said that she felt for the first time as if she belongs to the community, you know, as a Cambodian, not just not as a Chan woman, but as a Cambodian person. And that really touched me a lot, you know, because you know, my family and I have struggled a lot with belonging, you know, here in the United States. You know, when we came to this country, we didn't feel like we belonged here. You know, we were neither Cambodian nor American, you know. We always felt like we had to straddle two worlds. And Christine, I'm sure you probably have been through similar, you know, experiences. And when she expressed that, you know, I was almost one in disbelief that she, who I consider a Cambodian person in Cambodia, how can she not feel like she belonged? And it showed that there are depths of, you know, experiences in Cambodia with different, you know, and we have a lot of diverse communities in Cambodia. And people, you know, all live kind of harmoniously together, but sometimes there's not an acceptance, you know, of everyone as Cambodian. And so it brought to light, you know, that this is an important issue too. And that is really important to expose so many different stories that exist in Cambodia, to share, you know, this common identity that we all share. And which has nothing to do with our ethnic or, you know, backgrounds, you know, or our language that we speak, but that we all share this common place. You know, so I felt really, you know, honored that she would say that, you know, and that a River Changes course served not just as a reminder of the environmental, you know, challenges that Cambodia is facing, but also as a reminder that, you know, we all belong, you know, in this place together.
Thank you. Thank you. I did want to ask, both of you mentioned that, and we know that it takes a very, very long time to make a documentary film. And there's a lot of stuff that you cannot include unless the film is going to be 40 hours long. So was there anything
close
that you couldn't include for time's sake or for other reasons that you really wish that the audience was able to see?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Do you want to go ahead or shall I?
No, go ahead, Chris. I love listening to you first. It gives me lots of ideas. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, you know, actually, the reason that I stayed in Cambodia is not in the film. So there's a lady called Sopheep from Borikila community, and I filmed a lot with her. And she's probably like the strongest, nicest human being I've ever met in my entire life. And she ended up getting cut out of the film because the storyline didn't work out the way we were trying to weave the three narratives together. Hers kind of happened separately at the same time, and so there was a big jump in time because the film spanned 6 years, but we only shot with her for 2 years. And so it's actually the best footage the best, most intimate material that I have. Like, I lived with her in Borikila in this urban slum for almost 2 years, kind of like on a daily basis, filming from early in the morning till late at night, capturing this really amazing woman's struggle to not be sent to a relocation site on the outskirts of Phnom Penh, where they created a HIV community there, where they moved all of the people that were HIV positive out of the city into this one kind of rural slum, and she was fighting to be able to stay, and she really was in danger of losing the apartment that had been promised to her by allowing us to film with her. And so, I mean, her material would make a whole extra film, like a really amazing film, if we were ever able to get some kind of a budget to edit it. But yeah, that was the most painful decision I've ever had to make in my entire life, I think, not including the reason that I stayed in Cambodia for so long in the first place in the film. But it just, when we edited the film, and it was 6 hours long with her story in there as well, and we couldn't tell the narrative in a coherent way and have the protests happening and not have her be part of the protests, because it made her look almost callous that she wasn't involved and engaged. And actually her son, who was a drug addict, was one of the soldiers in Hun Sen's personal bodyguard unit, his personal military unit. So there was a lot of interesting angles that would have connected to it if we weren't able to film with him, unfortunately, during the protests. But yeah, you do, I guess you want to make the best film possible. and sometimes you end up leaving out things that are really precious and important to you. But I guess that's the nature. That's the hardest part of the job for me.
Yeah, thank you.
Chris, are you planning to turn that into another film or short film?
I would love to. I've tried editing it myself, but being so close to the material, I feel like I need a professional editor to do it justice. I would love to, like, if we were ever able to do it, I would jump at the opportunity. But it's a very difficult story as well. It's very grim, but it actually has a happy ending. But yeah, it's a tough sell. I've spoken to some broadcasters about it, but yeah, I think I would just have to make it and then see. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah. I kind of put all my eggs in one basket. So I started out just with 3 families and ended up with 3 families. You know, I just felt such connection, you know, with everyone, with each of the 3 families, and so close to them that I just didn't feel like it was necessary to, like, you know, expand or go out and film anything else. However, I did do a lot of filming of just like protests and, you know, and of other people, just to kind of give a general picture of what other people are going through in this context.
That's why we met.
Exactly, Chris. And you're the reason also why I decided, you know, I don't need to tell that story. Chris is telling that story. You know, someone else is telling that story. And that's wonderful. It's so wonderful that we have so many people on the ground, you know, documenting what's happening in Cambodia, who are able to tell so many different, you know, perspectives, you know, and give such a diverse angle on the subject. And so I didn't feel it was necessary to tell that story, but I felt so, I mean, it was so important for me to go through it, you know, otherwise we wouldn't have met Chris. You know, I would have been out in the jungle instead of like in Phnom Penh. But I did go to the protests and I interviewed people, you know, and I went to, you know, logging areas and interviewed people. So I have a lot of footage that we did not use in the River Changes course. But I had to go through that process, you know, to gain a bigger perspective on what was happening throughout the country. And I'm so happy that I spoke with people and, you know, and understood, you know, the greater context. But at the end of the day, it wasn't necessary to, you know, include it because, you know, Chris was already doing it.
Simpatico.
Pardon me?
It's simpatico. You're complement each other very well.
Yes.
Kaylanne, I did want to ask you, because when I first started working with you, the film had just come out, and that was back in 2012. Have you been back to visit any of the families?
Oh gosh, I saw Q and Q like maybe a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago even. Sari maybe like 3-4 years ago. And then the family in the northeastern part of Cambodia, I have not seen them, you know, at all since the film was released. They didn't have a cell phone or anything, no way to connect, you know, and then like everything was just on a roll, you know, to get this done and then this done and this done. Life was moving very, very good those days. It's a lot slower now. I'm more like a sloth or a turtle. Those are my spirit animals these days. You know, there's just so much going on in the world, you know, and it's really, I have to admit, it's very challenging to process so much. However, you know, I'm still connected with Cambodia. I lived there for 2 years. Just a couple of years ago, I went back with yeah, just like this, I had to go back. I had felt a calling to go back to Cambodia and live there and be, you know, rooted in our homeland again, and learn more about myself and learn more about our country and learn more stories, hear more stories. And yeah, I just realized that so much is so interconnected. All the suffering we're going through in Cambodia is connected to our suffering here in the United States too, and just really examining, the roots of all of that. It has deep roots in trauma. So yeah, Sari and Kyo and Savsamorn are all deep in my heart. But I'm continuing to learn and listen to even more stories that kind of confirm all the things that I've heard from them as well.
Before we move on to Chris's answer to that question, could you talk a little bit more about those? What other issues have you been covering, and what other films have you been working?
Oh, well, thank you, Christine, for that question. Because, with the current film that I'm working on right now, with Reem South Sea in Orang Valley, is probably like, it's the film that really is gonna like, she's taught me so much. Living with her and her family, all of them have taught me so much. Savsamorn and Sari and his family, and Kyo and her family have taught me so much. But C, living with her, being with her so many, for so long, she's really taught me the spiritual importance of the land, and our ancestry, that our ancestry is rooted in the land. Yes, it goes all the way to Angkor Wat, and yeah, the temples are beautiful, but more beautiful and spectacular than that are the trees. The giant trees, the kapok trees, the giant trees that grace our forests. Those are even more magnificent than Angkor Wat to me. And the land that have given, her and her family, and our family too, Christine, our ancestors, the ability to sustain themselves for so long. We lived for many centuries in happiness before colonialism. We didn't need very much, and Cambodian people still don't need very much. We only need the land to support and sustain us, and to also give us spiritual connections, according to, to see and the people in Orang Valley, and to, I think, all Cambodians, the forests are sacred and the land is sacred. But what we've done is that we've destroyed that sacredness, with our greed, and our desire, to have more than what we need. We don't need, I think Hun Sen now is worth $40 billion.
Wow.
How much money do you need? How much money, how much wealth and power do you need, to sustain yourself and your families? When I was working on Fight for Orang Valley, is a short about Orang Valley before I decided to make it into a feature. I was interviewing the elder women there, and this woman, she said to me, they can pile me like many, meters above our head, and we don't want their money. We just want our land for our children and the future of our grandchildren. That's really powerful. And Chris, I'm sure you've encountered, many experiences like this with people in Cambodia. Like, we don't want very much. We just want land for our children, the future of our grandchildren and their grandchildren. This is what legacy means. Legacy means community. Legacy means honor and respect. And what kind of legacy are we leaving for our descendants? What kind of ancestors do we want to be? And see, she knows very clearly what kind of ancestor she wants to be and what kind of legacy she wants to leave behind for her children and her grandchildren. You know, I think the question we all have to ask ourselves in Cambodia is what kind of, yeah, descendants do we want to leave? What legacy do we want to leave? And then what kind of ancestors we want to be too. So those are the answers that I've learned, you know, while I'm living in Cambodia. And I think those are the questions we need to really, really reflect on very deeply, you know, in Cambodia right now. And not just in Cambodia, like I said before, you know, all over the world. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you for that wonderful answer. Chris, I want to pop back to you for just a moment. And I know your film was a little bit more recent, but what has happened in the interim between when the film came out and now? And are you in touch with Venerable Luan Silvad? And what is he doing now? And I'd just love to know what is going on in your contemporary environment.
Yeah, I went back. So we released the film in 2018, and actually the Venerable came to the UK and Ireland. So we did a cinema release, and he came, and we did about 30, 40 Q&A screenings around the country, and he lived with me. And so I was like like the world's worst pagoda boy, making his food every day and making sure that he was looked after as best as I possibly could, making him his breakfast and everything. And I mean, he was extremely generous with his time back then. Then after that, I went back to Cambodia as well to visit Tep Vanny and Srey Po, but Tep Vanny was already in the US, where she still is today. She's applying for asylum there, along with Buntet. And actually, I'm not sure if you're aware, but the Venerable Savat recently fled Cambodia. There were fabricated videos posted on Facebook, on fake Facebook accounts, accusing him of having sexual relations with these women. And so the Tep Vong, the Supreme Monk, Supreme Patriarch, came out and said that he was to be defrocked and arrested immediately. So he fled to Thailand, and he's currently in Switzerland now. So I'm working with him at the moment, trying to help him resettle somewhere in a country. So he basically had to flee and is now looking for refugee status. So, I mean, unfortunately, it's, you know, the situation has only gotten worse in Cambodia because, you know, the thing that I learned, what you're talking about, Kaylanne, as well, in terms of a legacy, is just power corrupts, you know, no matter what, anywhere in the world, but the more power you have, the more corrupted you seem to become. And that's just that's so evident in Cambodia. Like after the protests in 2013 and the attempt at real change, that was, you know, the hope in people's eyes. Like when I went in 2009, people were holding up pictures of Hun Sen and Bun Rainey at protests, you know, petitioning him to intervene in land grabs in order to help them. You know, they would never dare to say anything negative about him in public. And then by 2013, you had millions of people out on the street chanting Hun Sen step down. But he managed to kind of crush that rebellion with the help of Sam Rainsy, unfortunately, and the opposition party. And since then, everything has become worse. All of the foreign language media has been shut down. All of the, even worse than that, the RFA and other Khmer radio stations were being seriously curtailed. Khmer language was extremely difficult as a foreigner, as an English speaker, non-Khmer speaker, to get any reliable news out of the country. And it's extremely difficult just to do your job as a journalist now. So many journalists are being imprisoned and attacked, and so many people, a lot of political activists, land right activists, journalists, are either in prison or have fled to Thailand or are in the process of seeking refugee status abroad now because of that. And that's just that, it's just a dictatorship, and that seems to be, you know, the people at the top, just like the religious sangha, the people at the top are corrupted by their power, but you know, the grassroots, the people on the ground don't, they really want change, and they do have these, they want just to be able to live in dignity and have a decent life, and you know, earn a decent wage and have a decent standard of living. And people are very connected to the earth. You know, Bangkok Lake was actually filled with sand that was dredged from the conflux of the Tonle Sap and the Mekong River. And they have no idea what the impact of that is on the riverbed or how it can affect the environment. People just, it's this totally destructive development model that has no concern for what the impact is going to be. But I think you learn that from us. You learn how to do that from Western democracies, these neo-colonial democracies that are able to just go and take whatever resources they want with no recourse for or no accountability to the people that are affected by it. So that's unfortunately, yeah, where we are at the moment. I'm helping the vulnerable try to get resettled somewhere, and Tip Vanny's in the same situation in the US. Yeah.
Thank you. Given that both of you are so invested in Cambodia and the Cambodian people, are you hopeful about the future in Cambodia?
Not me personally, not particularly. No, it's really difficult to try to get any kind of reliable news out of the country. There's nothing other than the wire services. There's nothing really being published anymore. It's extremely difficult, and what a lot of Western donors and Western NGOs have lost interest, and they've moved to Burma or they've moved somewhere else, you know, where they feel their donor money is more effectively spent. And so, in some sense, when Cambodian people need the assistance of outsiders the most, the outsiders have turned their back on them because it's become difficult or untenable to work there. But in some ways, that's the most important time. But without a change in government, I can't see how things are going to improve. And with capricious, destructive capitalism running rampant everywhere around the world, and this kind of depressing political lurch to the right that we're seeing in the UK and the US, all over Europe, you know, South America, why would it change? There's not really any kind of political motivation that I can see, but the hope that I have comes from the people themselves, you know, the people that you meet and that you talk to. And as long as there's hope still there, I think then there's the potential for change, but it's very difficult, sadly.
Kaylanne? Sorry, Chris.
Oh gosh, I ask myself that question every single day. You know, and every single day it's like I kind of motivate and encourage myself, you know, to have that hope, you know, to hold on to it. And I think if we didn't have hope, we wouldn't have children. You know, maybe that's why David and I still don't have a child. But many people still do, you know. And also, if we didn't have hope, you know, we would stop working and doing the work that we do. You know, we stop making films, you know, creating art, you know, and being activists and telling stories, you know. And I go up and down with this, you know. Chris, help me with this if you can. But you know, I kind of like, sometimes I wonder if I see the power of storytelling, you know. I appreciate it and I believe in it, and I'm just like, yes, we need to tell our stories, and we need to tell our personal stories as well as the stories of others who are challenged and, you know, oppressed. And, you know, and only by sharing and telling our stories can we understand how similar we all are. You know, that we're all in the same boat.
I mean, as a non-Khmer person coming to Cambodia and making a film about very local Cambodian issues, I was very aware of my outsider status, and that's why in the film I tried to make the film about people. So the film, I don't refer to it as an activist film. It's a film about activism, and it's a film about the consequences of activism and the lives of activists. But I'm trying to tell it in a really universal way, and I'm trying to look at kind of the universal truths that underpin all of these kind of different political landscapes that you can enter, whether it's in the West, whether it's in Cambodia or somewhere else. And so I was looking for sort of universal human truths and really individual people that you can connect to on an individual human level, people that, without me as an outsider and without being able to fluently speak Khmer, can still understand what motivates these people to do the things that they do. And that's where I get the hope from. I don't think that films can change the world necessarily, but I think that the role of a documentary film is to enlighten an audience and so the audience leave the cinema with a different perspective or a different view or a different way of thinking and a different way of seeing the world. Maybe, and it's better if, I think, if they have more questions than answers, you know, if you leave the film and you feel like, oh, well, now I understand that, that's fine, that's done, then you've done a disservice, I think, to your audience. You want them to be more inquisitive and inquiring, and to go out, you know, and start to learn more about what's going on, and to take what they've seen in the film as a way of framing the world. And I think that's where my hope comes from, is that as individuals, you know, you can make a small difference just by your attitudes being changed, and by being more welcoming and more forgiving, or more understanding to strangers, you know, which is one of the greatest lessons you can get from Cambodia, is the friendliness to strangers, which is just one of the things that amazed me walking around Phnom Penh, and people would just invite me in as a total stranger to sit and eat rice with them, just because I was walking past their house at the time when they were eating a meal. It's just this kind of warmth and, you know, friendliness that you really don't get in a lot of places.
Yeah,
That's
no, Chris, I completely echo what you're saying. You know, I feel the same way. You know, if, you know, actually the experience of making the film, of being with the families, hearing their stories, listening to their stories, understanding their stories, that has changed me more than anything else. And I believe that if I can, you know, I'm sure Chris, you feel the same way too, that if we can take these stories that we've learned from them and share it with others, and help others to reflect in the same way that we've reflected, you know, I think we've done something great. You know, so stories in that way, I think, can change our perspectives and change the way we see the world, you know, and if we can be open to it, you know, I think I think that stories are really powerful. However, at this time, I just, you know, this is why I asked for your help, is because I feel that things are really changing very quickly, you know, and actually it's been changing quickly for a long time, for many centuries, in fact. But right now we're feeling the consequences of our karma much more quickly than we, you know, that we can even actually understand, you know, and process. I mean, like this year, there's the pandemic, the virus, you know, the fires, there's hurricanes, there's, you know, tornado over Chicago, you know, there's like so much happening. And you know what? In Cambodia, this has been happening for the last 20 years. You know, all these great catastrophes that we're experiencing right now in the United States has been happening in Cambodia for the last 20 years. Imagine living in your forest and having your forest like torn down overnight, you know, or living on the Dalai Sap and not being able to fish. After 10 years, you're like, what? Where did all the fish go? It used to be so abundant, you know, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. And now there's hardly any fish in the water. You know, so all these traumatic changes that is going on, has been going on in Cambodia, is now we feel it resonating, you know, in the Western world, in the UK, you know, here, you know, in the United States. And so my question is, like, I have hope. Yes, I have hope that we can share our stories. At the same time, though, I wonder, you know, if there has to be more dramatic, you know, interventions.
But isn't that, that's, I mean, our role as filmmakers is to change people's perspectives and to offer new perspectives. And when you're surrounded by catastrophe and kind of, you're surrounded by oppressive dictatorial governments, right-wing governments all over the place, and people's rights being oppressed and freedoms being curtailed, and that just makes our job all the more urgent. And it's, you know, it's more important than ever to just knuckle down and, you know, trust the process, I think, and continue doing what you're doing, not believing that this film is going to come out and change the world.
No, definitely not.
You know, it's not possible.
I definitely don't have that illusion at all. I'm just saying, as a collective, you know, as a collective, not even just as a storyteller, but just as a collective, you know, I feel strongly in myself, you know, that we need more, even more dramatic interventions to stop this like tsunami, you know, that is coming over us.
We're getting all of the messages, whether we hear them or not, you know.
Exactly. Yeah, the messages have been coming for like for so long.
But now they're starting to affect us, so people are paying attention. But
exactly. Yeah.
Lines have been there for a long time. Yeah, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting how this microcosm of Cambodia speaks to such universal issues.
Yeah.
And I want to thank both of you for taking the time to speak with us. And hopefully we'll be able to see more of your work in the future. And thank you for doing what you do. Yeah,
Christine and Chris.
Yeah, thanks very much.
And the Cambodia Town Film Festival, Kaylee in the background, and Pride, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys.